Good morning. This is Life's Dream, number 115, The Tip of the Iceberg, with Corky Siegel.
It was a cauliflower morning, all cast in gray and blue. You came with little warning through the daffodil and dew. The sun rose right behind me, and my shadow fell on you. Then my shoestrings came undone when you touched me, Emmy Lou. The rolling hills kept rolling. I swear they rolled away. The wind kept right on blowing till it finally blew itself away. My heart kept pounding, let me in, I know you care. Then I melted into gravy with your fingers in my hair. in magnetic fields. My thoughts went racing on an oval track, and when you wrap your love around me, I nearly had a heart attack. Oh, Emmylou, 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 Lou. I'm so attracted to you. Is this really real? Come on, Emmy. What's the deal?
Story time.
That was lovely, Corky.
So let that run. I'm going to turn that off. And tell you about story time. So this is going to be very interesting. Many times we have experts on, like Alvy Ray Smith the co-founder of Pixar, like David Amram, the composer in residence at the New York Philharmonic with Leonard Bernstein, with the filmmaker Gary Sherman, and many, many people, Marcy Levy, Marcella Detroit, and Toronzo Cannon, and famous experts in the music business. But we have many other experts that we'd like to hear from. Some of them are experts as music lovers. And one of our regular cousins, friends, and fans is Peter. What's Peter's last name? Because he always writes Ferry Driver.
We just know Peter Driver.
We just know Peter. Peter Ferry Driver. That's all we know.
He's from Vancouver area.
Yeah, from up there in Canada. You'll notice that. And he's wrote me a letter where he sort of dug in to understanding music in general, and I always love that. So we're going to hear from Peter, and if there's time, I'm going to, and we're going to hear from Peter. So here is story time.
Yeah, title, I don't know. I just thought the tip of the iceberg, but if you think of something more fancy.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
Tip of the
Yeah.
iceberg.
Because that's something everybody knows about, that they think, oh, tip of the iceberg. I wonder what else is
I like it.
underneath there. Yeah, it starts off from the listener's point of view. And then as you dive down, it expands. It's no longer just a listener, it's how everybody's involved. And then how they became to be involved and how it was made possible for them to be involved because of instruments being manufactured over the years. So there's all these various layers. I mean, when we hear the music, we get emotional, we hear this beautiful sound, but underneath it, there's so many things that made that possible. And of course, there was the artist who had to start whenever, from childhood or later, and then they developed, and they had a passion for music. So there's all these many layers. And then, of course, I went a bit sideways as well, because music is a bizarre language.
What?
Like I said, music is a bizarre language.
Yeah.
Like I said, that when people respond to music, they dance, they jump, you roll on the floor. Like I said in the letter, if you were to do that outside, you would be arrested.
Yeah.
But when you play music, all these alternate, I said alternate universe, whatever, you enter into this alternate reality. And not only the musicians, but so do the listeners. Listeners jump up and down and dance and cry and laugh, and just because they hear these weird bunch of sounds produced by these varying instruments.
Right.
So you were thinking...
the artist has to produce that.
And you were thinking about the tip of the iceberg is what you're hearing.
As what I'm hearing.
And then you started thinking about the whole larger...
Underneath. And then I said that when you begin to peer down, this is from the listener's perspective, only few of the listeners can look a couple feet down. They don't see the whole bottom. But like I said, some people, like fans, they'll say, oh, that's Corky Siegel playing when they hear it. Or they'll say, oh, that's that conductor playing. Or there's that violin player that I know. So they go into this second level.
Right.
But that's about it. Critics can go to that level because they follow music, and fans can, or somebody who really follows an instrument say, oh, there's Nahuyan on violin. So, but then you go down to the next level is that all these musicians are talking to each other with this strange language. One is a violin going squeak, squeak, squeak. Somebody's going on a drum. And these various languages all come together to make a whole. But one of the things that I think is that once you go beyond a certain level, your perspective disappears. And then from then on is the artist's perspective and what brought him to that level. We can only look so far down, but the artist can look all the way down to the first time he picked up a harmonica. So it's a slow immersion, but the focus of the listeners disappears quite quickly, but the focus of the artist continues all the way down.
The artist's perspective is one thing, and then my perspective is another thing.
That's true. So do you want me to just start right from what I just said, from the top down?
Yeah.
Okay.
Tip of the iceberg.
All righty. Well, it started off by, I was listening to a podcast, and they said wrote that to you, they had 100 feet of music. And I thought, suddenly my mind just went kaboom. That's a lot of music. And I thought, you could just pick up one single LP and play one cut off that LP, and suddenly there's a whole world that's right in that one song. And I thought, and what am I as a listener seeing or hearing? I'm hearing this music, and it affects me certain ways. I might laugh, I might cry, I might turn it on, off. And I thought, this is a final product that has been assembled. This is the tip of an iceberg. And there's a lot that went into producing this one little piece of music. And then I thought, well, people like music critics, fans, instrument lovers, lovers of opera, the blues, they're able to look below the surface up to a certain point. They can recognize an artist who's playing, say, oh, that's Corky, or that's a famous piano player, or that's a violin player that I really love. That's a bass player, that's Willie Dixon playing. So these little, you can have some clarity, but then the viewer's clarity very quickly starts to fade. Now we're transposed into this level where there's all these musicians, sometimes solo, sometimes more like a band, and sometimes big numbers like an whole orchestra. And they're all blowing on instruments, banging on drums, plucking strings, all making strange sounds. And it's a completely non-verbal language, which is actually quite bizarre when you think about it. But when they join all those sounds, they make a musical whole. That's absolutely incredible. And this musical whole can affect you. You can become quite emotional. You can trigger a memory from years ago, et cetera, et cetera. It's quite an amazing thing. But then as the observer's knowledge or vision starts to fade, there's a whole grouping, many layers underneath it, that suddenly transposes to the artist or to the musician. They're meeting all these other musicians. They have to be able to talk to them in this funny language to make this whole. They have to be able to play their instruments. Somebody had to make their instruments usually. Right. So there's an entire another layer happening of these people talking together. But then when you separate each performer, they also, how did they arrive at this stage where they could actually join this crazy group and talk this crazy language to make music? Well, then each performers or musicians or artists, be it their lifestyle become, how did they get acquainted? Did they start in school? Did they take music lessons? What is it that fueled their passion? And also, as I mentioned earlier, when a musician decides to become a musician, they roar off into this foggy road that they see absolutely no clarity ahead. They cross their fingers. They have this desire, they wish they had luck. They have to own their talent forever. And they roar off into this foggy road of music. And then some of them actually make it to play in an orchestra. Some become a solo artist. Some join bands, et cetera, et cetera. So there's this entire layer underneath that pushes this, what would you say, this entire enterprise together. And when you think about it, there's this gigantic iceberg slowly floating along the water, and we only see the tip. So that's it in a nutshell. And I did.
That's it in an iceberg.
And I also added the fact that instruments, I believe, fall into three categories, perhaps four. There's things you bang on, things you pluck, things you blow into. And then as the technology improved, they became a lot more sophisticated. And I mentioned saxophone, your buddy Ernie. Nobody in their right mind would think about making a saxophone. It's a very complicated instrument. You need metal, you need keys, you need the reeds, et cetera, et cetera. And then the artist can pick up these instruments and talk that language. And the language changes over time because instruments change over time. Right down to the level of electronic instruments. And I should add voice as well, but that's separate.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this entire, all these people, and then there's the technicians who can do a recording and put it on a disc or onto an MP3 and send it around the world. They're part of this iceberg as well. And like I said, we only hear that final result, but underneath it, boy, oh boy, a lot of ice.
Starting with the music of nature, thunder, rain on leaves, the babbling brook, the sound of the animals, the birds, that covers a whole big territory of expression and feeling.
I remember listening years ago to a Joni Mitchell interview, and she said, I was just tuning my guitar. She was on the island here in Vancouver. She said, I was just tuning my guitar to the sound of this brook.
Ooh.
Yeah. So there you go. There's nature and the desire to reproduce or enter that realm.
Right, and make instruments to come up with other sounds.
Yeah.
That either mimic or expand upon the palette.
Or try to explain.
Yeah. So when I think about music and the whole thing and the tip of the iceberg and that whole thing, that I really think about the innocence of the sounds of nature. And I look at the performing artist that has the potential for having that same freedom and expression. And so that creates a whole different world.
Exactly. That's how I meant to say when I said there's this one universe and then you go on to this alternate universe and who knows which is the real one.
Yeah. And then there's the whole thing which I've been working on since I've been performing is the whole psychology of performance itself.
Right. Yeah.
So what goes in, and the way I describe it, I say, what is the healthiest perspective for a performer? Not what's correct, or accepted or anything like that, but what is a healthy perspective for a performing artist so that when they perform, they're in the place they want to be.
Yeah.
I'll just give you one funny example of this. I have a friend who learned to play the guitar and sing, and all of a sudden he's on the road doing performances. And he said, I really love performing. I love looking out and watching the audience and watching their expressions. And some of them are smiling, and others are nodding their heads. Corky, I really love that. And I says, well, Ron, what do you want from an audience? And he said, well, I'd really love for them to pay attention to what I'm doing. That gives me the greatest joy. And I says, Ron, how could you expect the audience to pay attention to what you're doing when you're not paying attention to what you're doing?
You're watching the audience.
Yeah. So it's stuff like that. That's like, you could say, yeah, that's absolutely correct. And yet a lot of people don't understand that. A lot of performing artists don't understand that. The other thing is, someone said to me, how do you connect more to an audience? And when they asked me the question, I had a revelation. I said, we're already connected to the audience. cousins, right? We're already deeply connected with each other. We're already connected. But of course, I could share some techniques with you that would make it seem like we're not connected, so that then we have to connect, but we won't be as connected as we were before we tried applying those techniques. So
Yeah, no, that's true.
there's all these psychologies in how to approach performing in a healthier way. And then when I did write that book, that was the object of the book, is to boil it all down to just some simple, acceptable, practical, non-magical things you can do to rid yourself of non-clinical stage fright, for instance. To find a focal point for performing music. Where do you focus? So there's this whole world. I put a lot of it in that book I talked about. But yeah, you're at the place.
It's in that iceberg layer somewhere.
Yeah, it's down there. But it's not. It's a secret cave in the iceberg. Because we tend to just accept the pat answers. And you sort of mentioned it yourself. The music itself is so amazing and magical. It uplifts, it unifies, it heals. It does all those things completely on its own. It doesn't even need the artist. Listen to the birds, the rain, it's healing, it's uplifting. And then the artists, we get to take the sounds and, build instruments and then manipulate the sounds to our own pleasure. My focus and perspective has changed a lot. To the point where music is energy, and it's about people. That's where it's come to with me, and I see it in everything. But anyway, that's a whole other story. That's where that little hidden cave, of exploration. But
maybe we've only scratched the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah. And when you're in the middle of the iceberg there, I don't understand how these musicians can do what they do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, it's beyond my grasp of how they can do it. The understanding, like someone like Ernie Watts or Howard Levy, or, I come from a whole different direction, from the folk music direction, where
Right.
you play music because you love it and you just do it, and I'm going to sing no matter what anyone tells me. And so, you do it, and then you find ways that works for you.
Maybe last but not least, I just love to see the difference in what happens to an artist when they are creating their art. It's like I said, that if they didn't have an instrument in their hands and they were doing that on the street, they would be arrested. like go like this and roll on the floor. Or imagine a drummer waving his hands, his feet in public. Somebody would be calling 911.
Yeah.
I just love to see the difference in what happens to an artist when they are creating their art. It's like I said, that if they didn't have an instrument in their hands and they were doing that on the street, they would be arrested. Go like this and roll on the floor. Or imagine a drummer waving his hands, his feet in public. Somebody would be calling 911.
Yeah.
But when you play music, then all that is okay.
Yeah. And the thing is, that's what you have to do to play music. It's a dance. But from a musician's point of view, it's not about sound. It's about everything you're doing physically to manipulate that instrument, which inevitably makes a sound, and that may be the result and the goal. But in order to get to that goal, you have to do the physical dance. And so it's a dance. So you're dancing. You're just dancing.
Many musicians many members of the audience, when they enter into that world, in order to see things clearly, they close their eyes.
Right.
When your eyes are closed, then you're not disturbed by advertising signs around you and whatever. It's dreamlike to say, "Oh, I was listening to that music when the sun went down." But it'd be better to listen to that music when you closed your eyes. And I find, personally anyway, when I really want to listen and experience what that artist was feeling at the time, I close my eyes and I seem to then connect with that artist. And I've seen artists do exactly the same thing. Getting back to good old Rick Estrin, he's got an organ player called Lorenzo Farrell. He plays keyboards. Guy's phenomenal. He does the Rick Estrin, but he does other stuff. Whenever he is in the groove, his eyes are shut. He is playing fantastic stuff with his eyes closed.
Yeah.
And many artists do that.
Well, a little girl in kindergarten raised their hand and said, "Mr. Siegel, why do musicians play with their eyes closed?" And another little girl raised her hand, and I said, "What?" And she said, "Because that's where the music is." You know?
Agreed with the little girl.
And another version of that story, someone came to me and said, they just came to a chamber blues concert, and they says, all that stuff that's going on stage is really a distraction to me. I wish you guys wouldn't move around so much. And I said, just close your eyes. You think we have a closing statement that's going to solve all the world's problems?
Closing. Be kind to each other and listen to music from your neighbors.
That's great. Ta-da.
All right, thanks, Gorky. All righty.
Okay.
And we say Peter Driver because he is actually a ferry boat captain. He is a ferry boat driver, and he and his wife have a sailboat, and they have sailed all over the world.
In 80 days.
As their pastime. So
Yes.
he is definitely a man of the
and
sea.
a very creative guy, too. Okay, that was Peter. And so we're going to say goodbye. And we'll Zoom now. And hopefully Peter will be able to join us.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye-bye. See you soon.
We'll see you on the Zoom. Right, Holly?
That's right.
Okay.
Bye-bye. See
Bye.
you soon.